On behalf of Indian Institute of World Culture and Karnataka Sanskrit University, a very warm welcome to this lecture by Dr. Raj Vedam. Today's speaker is a true polyglot and a polymath. Having been in US for more than 35 years, he still can speak 7 Indian languages. And he has been crisscrossing India for the last 20 days, and he has delivered more than 25 lectures. So today is maybe the 25th or 26th lecture what he will be delivering on variety of subjects. So a true polyglot and a true polymath. He is well followed and for his oratory. He is a popular TEDx speaker. And so please join me once again in welcoming Dr. Raj Vedam, who will be speaking today on some stories, some science. We also have with us Dr. Satyavati, the President of Indian Institute of World Culture, with us. And also we have Dr. Ahalya Sharma, the Vice Chancellor of Karnataka Sanskrit University with us. So a very warm welcome to both our distinguished guests. Before Dr. Raj delivers his lecture, a very brief background on Dr. Raj. So we all know Dr. Vedam for more than 10 years, and at this very venue he had delivered his lecture on the on a particular topic on the Aryan and Dravidian identities, the manufactured edifice. So this he had delivered at this particular venue in 2018. So welcome back to this venue, sir. So Dr. Raj Vedam obtained his master's degree in electrical engineering from the Indian Institute of Science, Bangalore, and a PhD also in electrical engineering from Oregon State University, USA. He has over 26 years of professional expertise in power, electronic design, automation, oil and gas industries, and has worked in applied mathematics and engineering across multiple disciplines. He has several patents and international journal and conference publications. Working at the confluence of applied mathematics, engineering, algorithms, and computer science, and using tools of archaeogenetics, archaeoastronomy, archaeology, and pursuing evidence of knowledge transfers from ancient India, Dr. Raj Vedam has put forward a strong thesis with verifiable facts on the antiquity of the Indian civilization and the many discoveries made in ancient India. He has delivered over 500 lectures in India and US on the subjects of scientific validation of narratives on history of India, in which he has developed a deep interest. He has conducted dozens of high school teacher training programs in India on multidisciplinary approaches to history. He has also revised history textbooks for Texas Education Agency as well as the state of Telangana. Dr. Raj Vedam serves as the director of Arsha Satsanga, a non-profit focused on Indic education based in Houston. I now request Dr. Vedam to deliver his lecture. Over to you, sir. Yeah. You can.
Check. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Namaskara, ellarigu namaskara. It's a real privilege to come here. It's a real privilege to come to IIWC and present the talk again. And so I thank the administration here for inviting me. Thank you very much. And I also like to thank Mythic Society, Prasanna Sri Prasannaji, who has been very kind to help me with these lectures for the last 2 or 3 visits I made to Bangalore. So thank you very much. Without your help, I wouldn't be able to do these things. So thank you. So with that, I will start with my lecture. This light is really bright on my eyes. I need to squint. I'm trying to get out of that light. I hope I don't fall off over here. This one can be okay. All right. So the talk today is on some stories and some science. I was requested to speak on this subject because in this forum I've spoken about the Aryan Dravidian identity, how spurious these identities are, who we are as a people, Bharatiya nation, and so on. So I hope that this is an interesting talk over here. And if I can make this work. Okay, there seems to be some problem. Let me see. This is working. And this is not working. So I need to do this. Okay. So this is the, good, it's working now. So before we start, the question is there any evidence that Indians did a transformation of knowledge from one domain to the other? Because that's the premise of my entire talk, that Indians wove science through the metaphor of stories. They communicated these ideas. So is there evidence to show any such thing? And towards that, I'd like to quickly present some ideas over here. So we see that metaphors are used to encode knowledge because it makes learning painless. In the wisdom that we have, these are rishis who have these enlightened wisdom through their meditative states of mind. They understand the phenomena, nature, and so on. And so the ideas are very difficult to understand. Language is tough. How do we communicate these things? So we see that these have been woven with some metaphors into stories where the language is entertaining and it's easy to retain these ideas. Even after thousands and thousands of years, these stories entertain us. And if we have the key to unlock the metaphor, the wisdom becomes very, very clear. So that is what we're trying to see over here. And the evidence is there all over the place. And one such example is Aryabhatta. Aryabhatta, who had an alphanumeric system. So he converted numerals into alphabets, and he was able to communicate mathematical concepts using alphabets itself. He had, I'm not going to read all these things, but basically we see that to represent numbers of this form, he had a mechanism using the numerals over here and the letters over here. He was able to communicate this in the form of a verse. Very easy to remember huge numbers and other quantities if you know this kind of a system. We see the same thing in Madhava. Madhava had a slightly different system, but said Kattapayadi, but he is basically assigned tables and such things to communicate this. This is one such example. Another example that we see is that when Playfair wrote Astronomy of the Brahmins over here, and he says that he was an eyewitness to the way astronomers were doing their work. He says that the astronomer, he's given a diagram, this is a Frenchman's diagram of a Brahmin astronomer. He has got some shells, he throws the shells, does some calculation, looks into his palm leaves, he does further calculations, and he says, yes, this is what the eclipse will start at this time, it will end at that time, and so on. So what we see is he arranges the shell, repeats the verses to guide his calculation from his tablet of palm leaves, takes out the numbers to be employed, and he obtains as a result of wonderful certainty, but has little knowledge of the principles on which his rules are founded. He has no anxiety to be better informed. He's perfectly satisfied if the eclipse starts and ends at the given time. So what we are seeing is formulas were versified. They have some index to the palm leaves, and they enabled computations. He is not concerned with why do the formulas work. He only knows the formulas work and he's happy with it. And we see this kind of thing throughout in the Indian context. This kind of thing happens. And we see that Indians have always used a literary style using poetic figures of speech with metaphors and so on. In most of the works that we have, it predominates. So it means that if you have the key to unlock that wisdom, it becomes clear. If you don't have the key to unlock that wisdom, it remains a silly mythology, right? A pedestrian understanding, but a silly mythology. As an example, I've said, if I, as a PhD engineer, for example, I do my PhD in system studies, I do a deep study of the electrical power system, for example, and I know why it will become unstable and so on. If I want to, I discover some algorithms that help me to do that. But when I want to talk to an operator in the power station, I don't have to tell him all this deep mathematics to make it happen. All I need to do is tell him that if this meter reading that goes up, you turn this knob. If this meter comes down, you turn this knob. So this kind of an operational idea is good enough to make it work. And our systems work beautifully with operators doing these kinds of things. Same thing with PhD biochemist. They study the pathways to disease and how to discover cures and all these kind of things. In COVID time, we had a whole army of biochemists doing these things. So they discovered drugs at work. But when it's implemented by general practitioner doctors, They may understand how it works, but it's not necessary. They know that clinical studies were done, and this is what we know in this particular range. These people did well, and so on. This is a side effect. So they know how it works. That's good enough. Similarly, we see our rishis and acharyas. They were the ones who discovered and created knowledge, enormous bodies of knowledge. How do you communicate it to the common person? So they had some ways of converting that into a formula, like we saw the astronomer, and these are implemented by practitioners. So this is the way we see how transmission of knowledge was done. And we also see that our knowledge producers, they drew subjects from the palette of divinities and personalities. What I mean is that it is like an artist. An artist has got a palette of colors. They use these colors to create their creations and so on. We see a similar kind of thing over here. For example, how did Ganesha become Ekadantaya? There are two stories that say the same thing. One story says that when he helped Vedavyasa, he broke off one tusk and he started writing, he became Ekadantaya. But in another place, we are told that he ate so much, his tummy became so big, and night he's walking, he fell down, and the moon saw that and laughed at him. In anger, he broke off one tusk and threw it at the moon. That's why the moon became scarred, and that's how he became Ekadantaya. So this is what caused the missionaries to say that Indians are full of superstition and nonsense. They don't even get a story right? There are two stories that talk about the same thing. But you don't go looking for religiosity over here. These are intended to communicate two different metaphors. So we see this all the time. The same divinities are used by the writers to communicate different ideas. That's why you see this kind of thing. And you see even in mathematics, Leelavati, Bhaskaracharya is using Arjuna and other such kind of contexts to do that. So with that as a background, let me come to the main part of today's talk. We are talking about stories and the science that they communicate. So the first one I want to talk to you is about the child star, what I call the child star. It is an ancient observation of the pole star itself. We see that we know the story of Dhruva. Dhruva had a pretty unhappy childhood because his dad decided to marry a younger woman. And one fine day when Dhruva goes and sits on his father's lap, the younger woman pushes off and says, shoo, you have no place over here. And the poor boy is distraught. He's crying and weeping, where is my place on earth? And such things. Goes to his mother and asks. His mother gives him karma theory and such things. He cannot be consoled. He's still crying. Eventually he says, I'll go and pray to Bhagavan himself. And he goes off and does tapasya. One fine day, Bhagavan comes and asks, what do you want, Dhruva? He wants nothing. He's in a state of bliss. When he started his journey, he wanted something. But the end of the journey, he doesn't want anything. He's okay. But Bhagavan says, I'm going to make you into a motionless star. Your position in the sky will be so high above everybody else will go in pradakshina around you. Even the Saptarishis will go in pradakshina around you. So this is what Vishnu says. And it is clear to us that the story is recounting that he's the pole star. When the earth is rotating from west to east, we are in Bangalore, so our latitude is, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, about 15 degrees or so. 13. So which means we are pointing somewhere like this. The pole star, if you look to the north in Bangalore, somewhere over here, we seem to be rotating like this, west to east. If you go to Houston, where I am, around 29 degrees, we are rotating something like this. If you go to Alaska, around 89 degrees, it is rotating like this. If you go to Sri Lanka, where it is nearly at the equator, it looks like the earth is lying on its back and rotating like this, right? So this is the simple idea. The axis of rotation, when it's rotating, what is it pointing to? That point appears to be immobile in the sky. It is not moving. And that is Dhruva. So that is what Vishnu is saying, that he'll make him a motionless star in the sky where everybody will go in pradakshina around him. And this is what we see. If you take a DSLR camera, put it on a tripod in a dark sky, point it to the northern sky, and open the shutter for a long time, eventually you see the star trails. These are all the star trails. This is the Dhruvas right over here, and you see the circumpolar stars and the later stars. This is what you see. Now, the very interesting thing about the story is that, yes, this is again an example of the pole star, star trails, and so on. In the Vishnu Purana, in Book 1, Chapter 12, like I said, it's a very interesting episode. Bhagavan says, not only that, I'll make you into a motionless star, he says something more, very strange. He says, your unhappy mother Sumati, she will abide near you for a similar term of 1 kalpa. So he says, not only will you be a pole star, even your mother is going to be next to you for a period of time. This is very intriguing because to an astronomer, archaeoastronomer, this is a fact. We had to look for a time when we had a pole star where there was a companion next to the pole star. That's what we're looking for. Now, I need to tell you about a phenomenon called precession of equinox. Precession of equinox is a phenomenon where today the axis of rotation is pointing at some point in the sky, but the Earth is not remaining immobile at that point forever. Where it is pointing to is slowly tracing an arc in the sky. It takes 26,000 years to complete. Okay? And it is doing this under the gravitational impact of the sun and the moon, and to a lesser extent Jupiter. We know about these things. Now, why this is important is, if I'm pointing at a pole star now, it's not going to be a pole star forever. As this precession takes place, even the pole star is going to change. Where I'm pointing to is going to change. We know that. So today we have a dhruva, which I've shown over here. This is our pole star, slightly offset from the center. What you're looking at here is a projection of Earth's latitudes and longitudes of the sky, and they become celestial coordinates. So what you're seeing here is the celestial North Pole. Okay? So we have dhruva today, which is slightly offset over there, but there's no visible companion next to dhruva. In the year 2024, we don't see a companion. So the question is, was Vishnu lying? Was Vishnu lying that your mother will be next to you? I don't think he was lying, but we got to search for when exactly this pole star was there. So if you go forward, we are seeing the year 500 current era. We didn't even have a pole star. Why is 500 current era important? Because we have people like Wendy Doniger coming and telling us that the Puranas were composed the Gupta era. Gupta era, 300 current era, 500 current era, the Puranas were written. Well, the Puranas were written, we didn't even have a pole star at that point, because Polaris is right over here. The Polaris, which has come in our time over here, is somewhere so far away from the pole location. Okay, what about if we go to 500 BCE? I'm going back further in time, another 1,000 years. Did we have a pole star? We didn't have a pole star. We didn't have a pole star in 500 BC. Let me go further back in time, 1000 BC. There is no pole star over there. Let me go even further back in time, 2000 BC, no pole star. If I go to 2800 BCE, Thuban becomes a pole star, and next to Thuban is a tiny companion. This is an amazing validation of the Purana story in Vishnu Purana. Vishnu Purana is saying unambiguously that your mother Sumati is going to be a star next to you. There is no way it could have been written in any time frame except in 2800 BC, plus and minus 100 years, 200 years, this side and that side. That is when this phenomena would have been true. So this one is a clear way of counteracting the people who say that Aryans came to India 1500 BC, composed the Vedic literature in India. We just take one example, Vishnu Purana, about the pole star, and show that, no, mathematically and scientifically, I can show you the pole star. It's only in 2800 BC. So very interesting phenomena. So I'm recounting the same fact over here. This is our dhruva today in 2022 when I made this picture. This is dhruva. If you go back in time to 2800 BC, we see Thuban and we see the companion over there. So Vishnu grants a pole star status to dhruva. He says your mother will be nearby, only true in 2800 BCE. All right, was it an interesting story? Okay, I'd like to now tell you one more story. This story probably you're familiar with. This is the story of Surya. Okay? Surya is another very important figure that we have. And the story of Surya comes in many Puranas, but in particular I'm looking at Markandeya Purana. In the Markandeya Purana, we have said that Surya married Vishwakarma's daughter, who is Sanjana. Some say Sandhya, many names are there, Sanjana. We'll go with that. And they had children, Yama, Yamuna, Vaivasvata, Manu, and others. And one fine day, the Surya becomes so hot and brilliant that Sanjana could not take the heat. She abandons her husband and goes off to the cooler region. She leaves her shadow Chaya in her place to deceive the sun. One fine day, Surya discovers a deception, says, hey, you're not my wife, where is my wife? And she says that your wife has gone to the cooler region. That's what Sanjana says. So Surya also goes off to the cooler region, and the story continues over there. He finds her in the form of a mare. She's taken the form of a horse. He too takes the form of a horse. Ashwini Kumaras are born in that union. They are traditional healer physicians associated with horse and those kinds of things. And it says that her father, Vishwakarma, he chopped off Surya's brilliance, and marital bliss returned to Surya family. After that, they lived together happily. And this is what the story tells us. Now, the very interesting thing is the way Markandeya Purana describes this. It says, for example, when Sanjana, she takes a form of a mare and departs to what is called as Uttarakuru. Uttarakuru is a metaphor for a cooler region. We know it's a cooler region. She's gone to a cooler region. Then when we see that, it says Surya's form was formerly spherical, meaning it no longer is, excuse me, I'm so sorry. It says that his form was formerly spherical, but then at this particular point in time when he became brilliant, it says he was whirling around, earth with all its oceans, mountains, forests mounted up to the sky, the whole heavens with the moon, planets, stars went downward and were tossed about, and all the creatures were scattered, waters out of the ocean, lofty hills were shattered to pieces, summits and roots are torn asunder, and so on. Whole lot of horrendous things are happening on earth when Surya has become brilliant. That is what the story is telling us, right? So we need to find out what exactly is going on. What did our Purana writers intend to communicate in this metaphor? Clearly it's a metaphor, and we need to understand what are they communicating. Well, I researched this for some time, and this is what we are told, right? Ashwins come in many hymns in the Rig Veda, so many of them, and Markandeya Purana is talking about this. So it says that after Sanjana goes to the cooler, this is a Ravi Varma painting, she goes to the cooler region, Uttarakuru, and Surya also comes over there, Ashwini Kumaras are born. There's a Rig Vedic verse that says, Ushas is the goddess of dawn, she heralds the sun. It says, Ushas awaken the Ashwins for their share of the Vedic sacrifice. From these metaphors, what we learn is when Surya goes to the cooler region to search for his wife, in the northern hemisphere where India is, it is winter solstice. Because he's gone to the southernmost point, Dakshinayana has gone to the southernmost point, so it's come over here. And it appears that Ashwins are also born at that time, and they rise up at dawn with the sun, heliacal rising. Those are the two clues that we use as an archaeoastronomer to find out when was this phenomena true. Remember I told you about precision of equinox. Because of that, the nakshatra that will be at the winter solstice point keeps changing over time. So I need to find out when, at what point in time did we have at the winter solstice, the Ashwin nakshatra rising along with the sun. Well, if we simulate this, the astronomy and the planetarium software, it turns out that if this is 90 degrees, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. 0 on Earth is the equator. In the sky, it is a celestial equator. This is minus 10, minus 20, minus 24. When the sun goes to minus 24, we know it's winter solstice. And along the longitude, we have the Ashwini nakshatra. In order to simulate this date, I had to go to 7,200 BCE. That is 9,200 years before present. By following the formula that is there in the story, I was able to get this kind of a date. I know many of you are uncomfortable. Many of you are uncomfortable looking at this ancient date, but hold your breath. There's something amazing coming over here. So Tilak talked about this about 100 years ago. Then about 50 years ago, Abhyankar also started talking about it in his book. And for the last 15 years or so, I have been popularizing this particular aspect of the story. Imagine my surprise when this paper came out. This paper came out in 2022 in Nature. Nature is a very prestigious journal. And they're saying there was an extreme solar particle storm 9,125 years before present, exactly in 7176 BCE. This paper came out 2 years ago. And I said, whoa, all right, it's a smoking gun over here. I need to know more about what they're talking about over here. At the same time, one more paper came saying that tree rings reveal two strong solar proton events, 7176 and this particular time frame. So it turns out that our sun is going through a sunspot cycle that goes to a minimum and a maximum. It takes around 11 years a cycle to go about this. When it goes to a maximum, there's a propensity for the sun to have what we call a coronal mass ejection event, where charged particles are ejected out of the sun at high velocity. We're not talking about photons. Photons travel the speed of light. We're talking about charged particles itself, proton particles, and so on. So these, if we are unlucky and this is aimed towards the Earth, then within a day's time it hits the Earth and we're going to have problems and so on. So this is what is a coronal mass ejection. The biggest CME event we know in history is something called Carrington event. In 1859, Earth was hit by an event that is referred to as Carrington event. You can Google for that later and search for it. So at that time, it was the largest solar flare recorded. It resulted in a heavily ionized atmosphere, such that in United States, between Boston and Portland, people are operating the telegraph lines without turning on the battery power. The lines were so ionized that it was carrying a current over there, and they could do that. They even caught fire and so on. Normally, when these charged particles encounter the Earth, we have got magnetic lines of force that protect us. So these charged particles are conducted away to the North Pole and the South Pole. Over there, they interact in the upper atmosphere with the air molecules over there, and all kinds of ionic activity take place. And when the radioactive ionic activity takes place, these things shower down on the North Pole and the South Pole, and they're preserved in the ice in Antarctica, in Greenland, and such places, protecting the rest of us. When that happens, high school physics tells us when an electron is excited, goes to higher shell, comes back lower, radiates energy. We learn all this high school physics. That's why we see aurora borealis. When we see northern lights, southern lights, it's this ionic activity taking place. Normally, you see in a few latitudes on North Pole, South Pole, you see this. This event was so big, they could see it in latitudes as far as Hawaii and China. They could see it. That gives you an idea of how big this particular storm was. This one shows you the same thing. When the solar particles come, billions of tons of hot gases and charged particles hit the Earth, and like I said, conducted away to the North Pole and the South Pole. And typically, satellites are rearranged so that they're not damaged. We do all those kind of things in normal CME events. And scientists can go to Greenland, Antarctica, they can drill the ice cores, take it to the lab. This is like a time capsule now. They can go and slice it by time, and they can study the isotopes that are preserved over there. Knowing the half-life of some of these things, they're able to estimate how far back in time were some of these activities. So it turns out that in this paper, they're showing this is now the years before present, and this is the concentration of some of these isotopes. This is beryllium, for example. It goes right through the roof at 79125 BCE and so on. Same thing over here, same thing over here, and all these things. So what we are seeing over here is intense activity exactly in this time frame of 7176 BCE as revealed in the ice core samples. Why do we worry about this? What is the relevance to our Surya story? Well, it turns out that the Carrington event is estimated to be 10 times smaller than the 7176 BCE event. Carrington event, we could see it in latitudes in Hawaii and China. I'm saying this would have been so big, logarithmically one order of magnitude bigger, that anywhere you go, the atmosphere is so ionized, it looks like there's a haze, brilliant haze anywhere you look. Surya has become super brilliant. People are saying it lost its spherical shape. That's what Markandeya is saying, which means all kinds of activity must have been seen in the solar region in that place. And we'd have had all kinds of things like this one says. There are many things to talk about this, but I just pointed out these issues. This is pegged to 7176 BC by 2 studies. What we have done is, I've independently, archaeoastronomy, just by following the formula, I said 7200 BC. Now scientific studies saying 7176 BC, we had a solar storm, which is so big you can't imagine. Isn't this amazing? It is not every day that we see our Purana stories corroborated by science. Dhruva's story was one of them. This is the second story. This is telling us that our ancestors encountered this 9,000 years ago, and they preserved cultural memory by weaving it into story of Surya, Sanjana, and other things. It is telling us that after some time Vishwakarma did these things and Surya became okay. That means the solar storm, the Carrington event lasted for 3 or 4 days. This one must have lasted for weeks together, given the size of this one. After some time, Vishwakarma's calmed down the sun and everything is back to normal. That is what we learn from here. Pretty amazing story. So from this, I'd like to go to one more story. This is the story of what I call the fallen king. And this is an ancient observation of the Andromeda galaxy. Okay, hold your breath. You might think this guy's a crank. We need a telescope to see Andromeda galaxy. What is he talking about? But yes, bear with me for some time. So it turns out that the first question, did Indians even observe the Andromeda galaxy? This is a picture of Andromeda galaxy through a telescope. And this is a picture I took from my backyard of Andromeda galaxy. And this is Elon Musk satellite photobombing me. So anyway, this is a picture of Andromeda galaxy. It's around 2.5 million light years from the Earth. And this is the 1 trillion solar masses, the same size as our Milky Way galaxy. And science tells us it is on a collision course with the Milky Way galaxy. After 4 billion years, we're going to merge into one. Now, a Persian called Al-Sufi, in 964 current era, he saw that and described it as a cloud. He said it's a dark cloud, like a rain cloud in the night. But then after 1600s, telescope observations started, and the early telescope observers like Galileo and people following him, they thought it was a nebula, a gas in our galaxy, in our universe. Until 1920, Europe had no idea what this object is, right? Then after that, Hubble came along, and certain things that he did. He measured something called Cepheid stars, which are calibration stars, if you will, standard candles. Through that, he was able to say that these stars, this galaxy appears, he didn't call it a galaxy, this nebula appears to be 90,000 light years away. When he said that, suddenly people knew this is not in the Milky Way galaxy at all. So there are island universes. They call them island universes that are far away. The name galaxy came much later. Hubble was wrong in his calculation. It is really 2.5 million light years. But anyway, that established these things as a separate galaxy. Now, Andromeda, the constellation, as opposed to Andromeda, the galaxy, we have a constellation called Andromeda. This is known to the Greeks also, right? In Greeks mythology, it says that there was a beautiful daughter of this king, and for whatever reason, one fine day, she was chained to a rock, and the hero comes along and saves her, and they get married. So there is a story over here. Now, there is a very, very similar story in the Indian context also. And the story is a backstory of Mahabharata, really. We have Sharmistha, who's a daughter of the Daitya king. And we have Devyani, who's a daughter of the Rishi, Shukracharya. One day, these girls are playing, and they have a bath, and their clothes get mixed up, and this Devyani wears the princess clothes, and the princess gets very unhappy and pushes her into a well, and she leaves. Eventually, Devyani is saved by our hero, Yayati, comes and basically marries him, and so on. And as atonement, the princess Sharmistha is sent to work as a maid for Devyani. But then human nature happens, and she has an affair. And she has an affair with Yayati. And when that happens, children are born. Devyani gets very, very angry. And her father comes along, who's a rishi, right? Lots of power. He curses Yayati. So you enjoy life so much, you're going to get premature aging. You won't be able to enjoy anything. He makes him into an old man. Now, this man wants to still enjoy life. So he goes and asks, who among my sons is going to take my old age? Right? He asks each of his sons one by one, the Anu, Drihu, all these people he asks. Finally, his youngest son takes on his old age. He once again enjoys pleasures, becomes young, and eventually realizes his folly. He renounces life, becomes ascetic. And as a reward, he's allowed to come to Swarga. In Swarga, he's got a quarrel with Indra. And Indra gets so upset, he pushes him out, and this man starts falling. He's falling to the earth. So this is the story, right? So we can identify Andromeda constellation as Devyani, and there's a big W constellation in the sky. I'll show you that, Cassiopeia, that's identified as Sharmistha. This is the traditional Indian understanding. So this is Devyani, this huge constellation over here. This W in the sky, this is Sharmistha. In between these two is this Andromeda galaxy. It's a pretty small, faint thing. If you have a very dark sky, that means not Bangalore. You need to go to a place like Hampi or some such place where it's very dark. That's where I saw it, by the way. 2013, I was in Hampi in the middle of the night, seeing a brilliant display of the Milky Way galaxy, and that's the kind of sky you need to see Andromeda with the naked eye. But you can actually see it. So in the Indian context, rather, we can see that this is a picture that I took, early picture of Andromeda that I took under a very dark sky. Andromeda looks like a very dull rain cloud. And he's questioned by a rishi called Ashtaka, who's curious to determine what is this object. So our rishis knew a lot of things. They knew the stars, nakshatras, they knew the planets, they knew the moon, they knew the sun, they knew comets, they knew all these things. But this is a strange thing in the sky. It looks like a rain cloud. It's not moving. It's the same place in the sky. It's not a cloud, but it looks like a rain cloud. So they're questioning what is this object. So we see in this particular verse, in this Sambhava Parva in the Mahabharata, there's a statement where Yayati is falling to the region of celestials. And as he was falling, the Rishi Ashtaka is asking, who are you? You're falling from high. Are you like the sun emerging from dark masses of clouds? That is our clue, because it's exactly what Andromeda looks like to the naked eye. It looks like a rain cloud, a dull rain cloud, if you can imagine at night, slightly brighter than the rest of the sky. That's how it looks. And he's asking the same question. Are you like the sun who's emerging from behind those dark clouds and so on? Everybody's curious to know what is falling deprived of consciousness. And eventually, you can't read this, but Ashtaka asks, you look like a young man, handsome, decked with a celestial garland. That is very intriguing, because that's what Andromeda looks like. It looks like it's got these dust trails and other such things. The spiral structure looks like a celestial garland. And where are you coming? Where are you going? Are you falling down to the earth? Yayati says, yes, I'm falling down to the earth. Then Ashtaka asks a very simple question. Are there regions for myself to enjoy, or heaven or the firmament? Yayati is saying there are so many worlds over here for you to enjoy. It's not one or two. It's an expression that what you're seeing has got multiple stars, multiple solar systems, planets, and so on. And there's one more rishi over here who asks the same question. Are there worlds for me to enjoy as a result of my religious merits? And Yayati is saying, numberless worlds are there, full of joy and other such things, where you can never dwell. Await, if you dwell in each for 7 days, even then it will not be exhausted. In one place he's saying, as many as a number of horses and animals on earth, there are that many worlds over here. In another place he's saying, even if you spend 7 days in a world, you will not exhaust it. There are so many worlds over here. Very, very interesting speculations over here, that what you're seeing over here has got many, many worlds and stars and those kinds of things. And one more question Ashtaka asks, what are those 5 golden cars that we see? That is interesting to an astronomer once again, because in my early picture of the Andromeda galaxy way back in 2016, these are yellow stars in our Milky Way galaxy. That's identifier to where you can find Andromeda, and they're actually yellow stars. And he's calling out 5 golden cars. When I saw that 5 golden cars, I knew the references over here. I've taken this picture, I dug through my photographs, got this. This is the 5 stars surrounding these things. So very, very intriguing to put all of these things together. And we can conclude that Yayati is the Andromeda galaxy itself. It's an observation by our ancients about what its structure is. Those of you who think that we can't see to the naked eye, I'd like to tell you, yes, you can see Andromeda to the naked eye. You need to go to a very dark sky on an Amavasya night when there's no moon over there. Yes, if you know where to look, Cassiopeia points to it. So look for Cassiopeia in the sky, it points to it, and you'll see Andromeda as a very, very dull rain cloud kind of thing. So Devini is identified as Andromeda, Sharmista as Cassiopeia. In between is her husband Yayati. Andromeda galaxy described as a dark cloud-like object with countless worlds headed towards Earth, driven by 5 chariots. And I call this the world's first description of a galaxy. You don't find it anywhere else. It's an amazing, amazing piece. Okay, with that, one more story. This is all about stories this evening. So, there is an illegitimate birth of Buddhan. Buddhan is Mercury, right? And this story has got amazing parallels with science. I'm not claiming that our ancients knew science. I'm not claiming that. I'm only astonished to look at the parallels, and I'm sharing that excitement with you. Okay, so if you look at the story, it says in Vishnu Purana that Tara, she was the consort of Brihaspati, who is Jupiter. She left him to have a tryst with Chandra, the moon, right? And their tryst caused uproar and war with Sun, which is Rudra, and Jupiter, Brihaspati, on one side, and Ushanas, Venus, Tara, and Earth, which is the moon, on the other side. And eventually, Vishnu Purana says the struggle ended on Brahma's command, and Tara and Chandra union gave birth to a radiant Buddhan or Mercury. This is the story that we find in Vishnu Purana. I've got a snippet for you over here. So this is from Vishnu Purana, where it says, Soma became pretty arrogant and carried off Tara, wife of Brihaspati, then eventually refused to relinquish her. Ushanas, out of enmity to Brihaspati, took part with Soma. Rudra joined these people over here. And eventually you have two gods, this Indra, gods allied with Brihaspati. Gods led by Rudra hurled their missiles on the enemy. Daityas, the gods, earth shaken at her center by the struggle, had recourse to Brahma for protection, commanding Ushanas. Eventually he says, desist, stop this. And he compelled Soma to restore Tara to her husband. Finding she was pregnant, Brihaspati desired her no longer. And she gave birth to a son. That's what it says. And the son was radiant, very brilliant compared to everybody else. And Brahma asks, tell me, daughter, is this a child of Brihaspati or Soma? She says, of Soma. So this is what our story says. Clearly, it's illegitimate idea and all these kind of things. I was shocked to see that the story's sequence over here parallels our understanding of how Mercury was formed. And to talk to you about that, the first thing to ask is, did the planets accrete in their current spaces? Today we have the Sun, Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, and so on, right? Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and other things. Question is, did the planets form in their current place? Now, scientists today are discovering amazing things. If you take a picture of Mercury, observe this little thing over here. There's a tail. Mercury has got a tail. And the tail turns out to be sodium ion. There's a lot of sodium ions being thrown away from Mercury by the sun's activity, right? That's what we're seeing. So there are scientists today who are observing this, and they say that solar radiation strips the sodium from the crust. It forms a 24 million kilometer long tail. That's the size of this tail. Now, scientists say these volatiles should have evaporated before Mercury's crust hardened. The fact that today our solar system is 4.5 billion years old, by this time, all the mercury, all the sodium must have gone, but it is still there. So they are presuming that Mercury formed far from the sun. The estimate is Mercury formed 161 million kilometers away from the sun. And we study where that is. It turns out to be right in between Earth and Mars. So that's the first scientific fact that we get, that Mercury did not form in its current place. Mercury formed between Earth and Mars according to the latest scientific theories. Now, the theory also says there's a protoplanetoid. I'm asking, was this Tara in the gravitational attraction of Jupiter ejected in the early solar system turmoil? It is supposed to have grazed past Mercury, stripping away most of its rocky crust, and Tara merges with Venus. This is science, okay? The science telling us that there was a protoplanetoid that escaped the gravitational clutches of Jupiter. It grazed past Mercury, removing most of its rocky core, and this protoplanetoid merged with Venus. This is what we are told. Mercury was hurled towards the sun, but settled in an elongated orbit, preventing its fiery death by Rudra. Well, I've added these things, preserving its volatiles in its crust, because it was formed elsewhere and it's come to an elongated orbit over here. When it was first came there, it must have glowed in radiance. There must have been so much sodium ions over there, which was emitted in those early days. It must have glowed in brilliance more than any other planet till it cooled sufficiently. So what we learn is Tara was ejected from Jupiter, grazed past Mercury, removed most of Mercury's rocky core, merged with Venus, hurled towards Sun, settled in an elongated orbit. This is what we learn from this. And the parallels, these are the astounding parallels. Abandonment of Brihaspati by Tara. This is the same as a protoplanet leaving the gravitational clutches. If you study n-body dynamics, the gravitational attraction of n-body dynamics, we learn that's eventually chaotic. There's a lot of chaotic behavior over there. Early solar system turmoil, it could well have been that Tara escaped because it was ejected out of Brihaspati's clutches over there. The tryst with moon is some embellishment or maybe a lunar occultation, we have no idea. Collision with Earth proximity, Mercury, that would have caused orbital disturbances. There would have been gravitational dynamic play of Sun, Rudra on one side. We are told that Brihaspati was ineffective in his pleading with Chandra and Tara. Venus and Earth, proxy for Earth is Moon, Tara and Mercury on the other side. So this basically it's talking to us about a gravitational play when the new disturbance has hit the system, right? Till it finds a new equilibrium, things are going to happen. Tara merged with Venus. Earth was shaken to the core, obviously, because there's some kind of disturbance over here. And radiant Mercury settled in a new orbit revealed to the divinities. Brahma's command for cessation of hostilities is damping of orbital disturbances, the new gravitational relationship. So these are the parallels that I could draw out by looking at that story. It astounded me that our ancestors could somehow have seen the story that way. Now, I'm not claiming they knew these things. Maybe in a revealed state of mind, maybe the rishis have got this. I don't know. I don't know what it is. But looking at the parallels, we can easily see some of these things. So this is my story on how illegitimate story of Mercury. Going on, we also have a story on the birth of Chandra. Luckily, this is not illegitimate. This is an okay story. So Markandeya Purana says, Chandra, the moon, was born to the Rishi Atri and his spouse Anusuya. Now, Atri is the author of many verses for Agni in the Rig Veda. We find that also. We also know that Anusuya meets Sita of Ramayana, who is the daughter of earth, basically. And she has yogic powers to seed the earth with river, water, greenery, and forest. And according to Markandeya Purana, the symbolic union of the Rishi couple, fire and earth, fire from here, earth from here, this is what created the moon. And we know today that the direction for Agni is the southeast direction. The direction for Agni's spouse, Uma or Swaha, is the northeast direction. And every day the moon appears to be born from southeast to northeast. Over the course of a synodic month, you can find out that the moon goes from southeast to northeast direction because its orbit is offset by 5 degrees from the ecliptic. Because of that, we find this phenomena. It is drifting from this side to that side. So symbolically, it matches the story. Yes, it seems to be born out of Agni and earth, this kind of a thing. Now, science tells us that 4.5 billion years ago, in early solar system, a Mars-sized object called Theia collided with the Earth. Okay, we're talking about pretty long time back, 4.5 billion years ago. That collision created a massive disk of debris that eventually coalesced into the moon. This is Theia hitting the Earth, a debris is formed, eventually it becomes into the moon. And we are seeing that the Indian story is moon was formed from fire and earth. And truly, this event that occurred, fire and earth getting together and forming the moon, an exceedingly interesting parallel. Once again, when the number of parallels keeps increasing, we ask, are these coincidental readings or is there something more to this? I don't venture to say more, but our rishis had strange powers. Who knows how many states of mind they could have visualized these things and used this metaphoric language to describe these events. This is what we are seeing. Now, it's also interesting that today scientists are studying the Earth through seismographs and such things, and they found an anomaly in the Earth's core. That anomaly, many people are saying, is a remnant of Theia. Theia has merged with Earth's core, and those anomalies can be seen under Hawaii in the Pacific Ocean and so on. A small picture, apologize for that, but it shows these things. Moving on, one more story. This is the story of a king called Kakudmi, a wonderful father who was so concerned about his beautiful daughter, Revati. Revati was so accomplished as a woman, brilliant, beautiful, and so on. And her dad, poor Kakudmi, could not find a match for her. Wherever he goes, he cannot find somebody suitable for her. He decides, I'll go to Brahma himself and ask, have you made a match for my daughter? So one fine day, he sets off to Brahmaloka. And when he goes to Brahmaloka, he finds that Brahma is enjoying a Gandharva concert is going on. So they stand respectfully aside for the concert to be over. And when the concert is over, Brahma motions them, come here. Why have you come here? He explains all these things. Brahma starts laughing. He asks, why are you laughing? He says, in the time you were waiting for the concert to be over, 27 Chaturyugas are over on earth. Now poor Kakudmi is very upset. He's crying and weeping. He's sad. Brahma says, everybody you knew is gone, dead and gone. Kingdoms are gone. Everything is gone. Then he says, don't be sad. Go back to earth. By the time you go back home, it is time for Bhagavan Krishna to be, his avatar will be on earth. And his brother Balarama is the correct match for Revati. So eventually that happens. This is what we are told. So it's interesting for me to see that story of Brahma's concert and Kakudmi and his daughter, and this is the concert going on, Brahma, and they're standing aside waiting for that to be over. And I tried to see it through the prism of our modern science. Again, it's my reading of the prism of modern science, what this could be. So Srimad Bhagavatam is where you find this particular verse, and like I said, 27 Chaturyugas come to 116.64 million years. Each Chaturyuga is 4.32 million years. So now the question is, if this man has been waiting there and so much of time has passed, that in modern day we understand something called dilated time. Time is not absolute quantity, right? It's a dilated quantity. For example, physics, relativistic physics tells us that if you travel at close to the speed of light, time slows down for you, as opposed to an observer in some other frame of reference. Time is going to slow down for you. It also tells us by Einstein's same space-time fabric, it says if you're the presence of a super heavy mass, like a black hole, for example, there too time slows down for you. You experience dilated time. So I presume that he's in the presence of Brahma. Brahma is our personification, metaphor for all creation is in Brahma. So one can imagine that this is an estimate of ancient Indians' understanding of the mass of the universe, because over there, they've experienced this kind of a dilated time next to Brahma. And I also tried to say that if you see where the Milky Way galaxy is, we are over here. Our nearest neighbor is the Andromeda galaxy. This radius is about 8 million light years. So this is called the local group of galaxies. We want to find out at what point will the radius reach close to 116 million light years. And if you see that, we are here. There's a local group of galaxies. This whole thing is called the Laniakea supercluster. Approximately over here is where 116 million light years is. It's an ancient Indian understanding, in my opinion, of the size of Brahmaloka. If you say how big is Brahmaloka, Indian conception is approximately 116 million light years by this particular concept. Of course, we can discuss this, a moot point, but it is a kind of a relationship I'm trying to make over here. We can also estimate every minute of Brahma is 6 million Earth years. How do we know that? Because Srimad Bhagavatam is given as a formula, right? How many Chaturyugas make one Manvantara, how many of them make one Kalpa, one day of Brahma, one night of Brahma. Through that relationship, we can say that every minute of Brahma, 6 million light years. If Kakudmi spends so many Earth years listening to the concert, that means Brahma's concert took 19 minutes, 26 seconds in dilated time. We can even estimate that. I mean, if we are number freaks, we can enjoy doing these kinds of things and estimate these kind of interesting things. So, one more story. This is a story. Thank you. This is not really a story, but this is an occurrence in the Rig Veda. The Rig Veda is talking about the Rishi called Atri. It commemorates Atri because Atri saw a total solar eclipse. You will say, big deal. So many people see a solar eclipse. What is so special about Atri, right? So in this particular verse, it talks about Atri. By the fourth sacred prayer, he understood the sun is concealed by the darkness and so on. So the language used is one of Rahu and Ketu over here, promptly setting off our leftists and missionaries, twittering into laughter, saying that these Indians are so primitive. They think a demon called Rahu is swallowing the sun, how superstitious these guys are. So it took basically Aryabhatta to explain this, right? Aryabhatta explained that this is the ecliptic. Ecliptic is the apparent path of the sun as it appears to go around the earth. And this is the orbit of the moon. So the geometry of the orbit shows is a 5-degree offset between the ecliptic and the moon's orbit. So what this means is that if a solar eclipse must happen, this angular relationship must go to zero. This is where a total solar eclipse happens. On the other side, a total lunar eclipse happens, right? So this is what, and Aryabhatta called this node, ascending node as Rahu, and this descending node as Ketu. So Aryabhatta gave the scientific rigor to what we call as Rahu and Ketu, explaining what these metaphors were, right? Our ancient Indians use a demon metaphor, but then he's now using this metaphor of what it is. And Aryabhatta has given a whole lot of things. What is the length of Earth's shadow, length of Moon's shadow, duration of the eclipse? Amazing things are in Aryabhatta's work, but we are not going over there at this point. I want to focus on Rishi Atri. Why on earth was he commemorated in the Rig Veda as having seen an eclipse? That is what is bothering us, right? So it turns out that if you take a look at this work, it is a 1924 Journal of Science. He's referencing, Professor Ludwig is referencing basically Tilak. Tilak is showing the verbiage used here is Turiyana Brahmana. This is the words over here in the Rig Veda. And Tilak, 100 years ago, he translated this as some kind of an instrument. In particular, a quadrant. This is a quadrant. It's like a protractor that is used to measure angles in the sky. So somehow, Atri is associated with this yantra. And that is the translation that we see here, the fourth prayer. It's not the fourth prayer, but the Turiyana yantra. And come on, behave. This is not behaving. So this is from Tilak's Orion. So he says, I will interpret Turiyana Brahmana to means by the means of the Turiya. It's an astronomical instrument called quadrant, and Siddhanta Shiromani talks about this. And he says that for this man seems to have had some kind of an instrument. Today we understand that if you want to predict a solar eclipse, you need to know the angular relationship between the sun and the moon. As that angle goes towards zero, you know at the next Amavasya there is going to be an eclipse. Then you can estimate will it be a partial eclipse or a full eclipse based on geometry and things like that. Atri seems to have understood that. He seems to have understood the geometry. He seems to have understood there's an angular relationship. He seems to have had a device called the Turiyana Brahmana, using which he's able to predict that an eclipse is going to happen. And he's celebrated for that Atri has understood that the eclipse is going to happen, predicted it, and it happens. So this is why he's celebrated in the Rig Veda itself. Amazing to think that Atri could have predicted an eclipse. And hold your breath, there are several people trying to estimate what is the date of Atri's eclipse. I'm skeptical of these works. I don't think these are correct. There are many range of dates, but here is one such paper. Vahia and this person have said that this probably was in 4202 BCE or 3811 BCE, but I have seen one more paper where they argue that his eclipse should have been somewhere near 4800 BCE and so on. So many opinions are there, but it does not matter to us. At an ancient period of time, the Indian context, somebody's understood the eclipse phenomena, has a device to measure it, and also has the ability to predict it. That's what it says. Very, very interesting to see these things in the Rig Veda. Come on, behave. Okay, I'm going to another story now. This is the story of the goddess called Aditi. And Aditi has got a boon that helps mankind. What is the story all about? So Aditi, along with the co-sister Diti, married the Rishi Kashyapa, and through them you have the Devas and the Daityas. And so the story talks, she's a repository of everything good, truth, generosity, magnanimity, purity, and all these kind of things. But we are most interested in her appearance in the Aitreya Brahmana. In the Aitreya Brahmana, Martin Hogg translation, the second chapter, we are seeing that the Yajna went away from the Devas. The Devas were unable to perform any further ceremony. They did not know where it had gone to. They said to Aditi, let us know the sacrifice through thee. Aditi said, Tatastu, but I will choose a bone from you. They said, choose. She chose this bone. All sacrifices will commence with me and end with me. Very, very cryptic verse, and we have no idea what it means. But Tilak, once again to our rescue, he has identified what this is. He said, our ancestors were performing their ceremonies based on the celestial calendar. They had a celestial calendar that will tell them when vernal equinox happened. Vernal equinox is always New Year in India, right? That's the Vishu time and all these kind of things, Yugadi, that's the New Year time. So they say, what is a nakshatra at the vernal equinox point? Now I'd like you to imagine, if, let's say, 4,000 years ago, Kritika was at the vernal equinox point, and the axis of rotation is pointing over there. But then over 1,000 years, my reference point is going to change as precession of equinox takes place. Kritika is still over there, but then now I'm pointing somewhere else. So how do I know where is the new year if I'm using Kritika as my reference point? This is what he said. Our ancestors had a calendar in the skies which had got messed up thanks to precision, and they were wondering when to do the Vedic sacrifice. They have reset the calendar to Aditi. Aditi is saying, the new year will begin with me and end with me. Vernal equinox will begin with her and end with her. That is what she's saying over here. So we have to find out what is Aditi in our nakshatra model, and when was that at the vernal equinox point. So those are the two things that we need to search over here. So if we take a look, it turns out that Aditi is part of the Punarvashu nakshatra. In Punarvashu nakshatra, we got two stars. This is Diti and this is Aditi. Okay? In the Greek tradition, it's called Castor and Pollux. Castor and Pollux are Diti and Aditi. Now, in order to simulate this at vernal equinox, once again, 90, 80, 70, 60, 50, 40, 30, 20, 10, 0. When the sun is on the celestial equator, it's exactly equinox. Over here, we got vernal equinox, and the longitude, we got Punarvashu. To simulate this, I had to go to 6000 BCE, which means 8,000 years before now, our ancestors already had a working calendar. 1,000 years prior to that, they had a calendar that was working, and that calendar stopped working, and they have reset the calendar to Aditi. This evidence is there all over the place. In fact, in our works, astronomical works, we know that the reference point was changed at one point from Mrigashirsha. Mrigashirsha is Orion. In 4000 BC, that was the vernal equinox point. That is a zero longitude for our Siddhanta astronomers when they want to find out about the positions of planets and so on. We also know that at 3000 BC, it had changed to Rohini. Rohini is Aldebaran. That was at the vernal equinox point. We know in 2300 BC, Kritika was at the vernal equinox point. From there, it went to Bharani. From Bharani, it went to Ashwini. Ashwini in 800 BC. Ashwini Nakshatra at vernal equinox is the version of Surya Siddhanta that we have. There's a version of Surya Siddhanta that Burgess translated, and in that, the list of nakshatras from vernal equinox is Ashwini. So we know that is around 600 or 800 BC and so on. So anyway, this particular episode of Aditi, if we simulate this, comes to 8,000 years before present. Our ancestors had a calendar that was working. They had to reset it to Aditi. This is a nice one, the love story of Chandra. So this is what I talked about in a TEDx talk several years ago that became very popular. And so I'm sure many of you have heard it, but anyway, I will repeat this love story of Chandra. So we are told meaning in Matsya Purana, in Skanda Purana and other works, we are told that Chandra married the 27 daughters of King Daksha, promptly setting all our leftists into laughter again. Chandra is not a man. How can you make him anthropomorphic? How can you do that? Right? Things of that nature, and saying that this is all nonsense. But then this metaphor is saying something altogether different. We know that if you're in the evening time, when the moon appears over the eastern horizon, it appears against some background star. Right? So today the moon appears at 8 o'clock at night. Tomorrow it might appear one muhurta later, approximately, so which means it's a different nakshatra in the background or a different star in the background. Our ancestors saw it takes approximately 27 days for the moon to come back to the same nakshatra. Right? So they divided the entire ecliptic into 27 segments of 13 and 1/3 degree each, so that they could identify the nakshatras. In each of those segments, they identified sometimes a bright nakshatra, sometimes a combination of fainter nakshatras, fainter stars, and they gave the mnemonics of the moon's wives. So with those mnemonics, we can figure out who is going to come next, because there are so many stories of the nakshatras. So this way, one, if they remember the stories, they can map the skies. They remember what the nakshatras are in the sky. Very, very trivially and easily you could do that. So that is what it says. It also says that in a 24-hour period, the moon is going to fall back by 13 and 1/3 degrees. Today at 8 o'clock, for example, if the moon is over here, then tomorrow at 8 o'clock at night, at the same time, it would have fallen behind by 13 and 1/3 degrees. That is why our ancestors said, Chandra visits one wife every day. That is the meaning over here. Don't be confused because of the rotation of the earth. Moon appears over there, it goes all the way over there. Don't be confused by that. In a 24-hour period, where is the moon? It's fallen behind by 13 and 1/3 degrees. So this part of the story is related to what we call the 27.3 sidereal month. Indians had a way of tracking the nakshatra of the day and marking the passage of time. So this is the sidereal month. The story also says that his father-in-law Daksha was furious because this man loves only one of his daughters more than the others. So he curses him. He says that, you know what, for this transgression you're going to die. Chandra doesn't want to die. He runs out to Mahadeva. Mahadeva, I don't want to die. Mahadeva says, I can't remove the bone, but I can, rather the curse, I can make it somewhat lighter. He says, after you die, you'll again regain your strength, again you'll go back, and all these kind of things will happen. So that's what Chandra does, Shiva does. And this part of the story is saying that Chandra will experience a life of waxing and waning. And this is related to the 29.5 synodic month, the Tithi. The Tithi is what we are concerned about over here. It comes to that. And our ancestors encoded this in this part of the story. So the story is relating two things for us, right? So far, sidereal month, synodic month. Both marks the passage of time. That is what we see here. Doesn't still answer why Chandra loves Rohini. So for that, we have to understand one more phenomena. This is the phenomenon of occultation. Occultation is, from our perspective, when the moon seems to cover a nakshatra or a star or come close to a nakshatra. That is called an occultation. So here, for example, in 2006, the Chandra is occulting Kritika. These are the Kritikas, and it is common occulting the Kritika nakshatra over here. So again, we have to understand the geometry of orbits from the ecliptic of the key nakshatras. If you look at the orbit of the Earth, bottom line, the inclination is 5.14 degrees. This is how much the moon is tilted from the orbit, apparent orbit of the sun, or in reality, Earth's orbit, or ecliptic, 5.14 degrees. If we see, I want you to imagine this. This is the ecliptic, the apparent path of the sun. Our nakshatras are distributed about the ecliptic. Now the question is, if the moon is going to go 5 degrees away from the ecliptic and minus 5 degrees away, the only nakshatras the moon will touch are the ones that are in this band. If the nakshatra is located beyond 6 degrees, the moon will not even touch it. Plus, if the nakshatra is between a certain, I'll talk about that a little later. But anyway, what we see is Rohini, Aldebaran, is at minus 5 degrees in the ecliptic. Jeshta, Antares is minus 4. Kritika is 4 degrees. Chitra Spica is minus 2. Magha's Regulus about 0.4 degrees from the ecliptic. And this will help you to understand that. So this is the ecliptic that you see here, and the nakshatras are distributed about this, and Rohini is over here, and Chitra is over here, right? So what we see is, if the nakshatra is 6 degrees away from here, the moon is not even going to go there because its extent is only up to 5 degrees from the ecliptic. If it is between 4 to 6 degrees, there will be a 4-year set of continuous occultations. If it is less than 4 degrees, then the moon, as it traverses this direction, it will have one set of occultations. Then there's a pause of some years. Then it's going to come back, and there'll be one more set of occultations. This is what we find. But if it is at 4 to 5 degrees, basically it appears that the moon has come here, it's paused, it is coming back. So you have a large set of occultations when it is over there. So what I found is, between 2014 and 2018, Rohini was occulted 50 times, whereas in the previous occultation cycle of Kritika was only occulted around 25 times. So it's clear that the moon was touching Rohini more often than the other nakshatras. Our ancestors have studied the 18-year cycle of the moon, which is basically the Matin cycle. They call it Matin cycle today, but it's implicit in what the story is telling us. And they've seen that Rohini is the one that is occulted the most. And they've converted that into a love story over here. The Chandra loves Rohini more than the other wives. So, yes, this is a table that I constructed over here. Between 2005 and 2018, Rohini, if you start in January 9th, 2015 to 2018, 1,113 days, and there are 44 lunations, which means the moon cycles over here, 49 occultations, whereas Jeshta has got 69 occultations in 1,857 days. Kritika has got 79 occultations, but in 2,132 days. So if you divide the occultation by lunation, the ratio here is the greatest. Rohini is the greatest. That is what it comes to. Added to this is the precision information. Precision is going to change our perspective of which nakshatras are occulted more. So at some period of time, these numbers would have been more pronounced for Rohini as compared with other nakshatras. So very, very interesting how our ancestors observed these things, converted them into stories, and after thousands of years, we remember the stories. We remember, so we have the key to unlock the wisdom. We know what did our ancestors mean to indicate with that story. Very interesting. Here is a picture of Rohini occulted in 2016 by Chandra. And by 6:30, 6:15 it starts, 6:30 the occultation is over. It's coming out over here. All right, so the next story. This is a story of the Rishi called Agastya, right? So he's the author of several verses in the Rig Veda. He's one of the Sapta Rishis. He appears in the Ramayana and Mahabharata, many Puranas, and also intriguingly in the Tamil literature, Tamil Sangam literature. We are always told that that is Vedic literature, this is a Dravidian literature. But then here is a case where there is a Rishi who is very prominent in the Sangam era literature and so on. So the story tells us that we know that this particular star, Agastya, is the star called Canopus. It normally is the southern hemisphere. India is in the northern hemisphere. We cannot normally see Agastya, right? I mean, you cannot go to Sri Lanka and peek like that and see, can we see Agastya? It's not possible because the curvature is too much. You can't do that. But sometimes because of precision is something the earth is doing. So the earth is dipping this way. As it dips like this, as if you're on a ride in Disneyland, right? It has gone this way, you're able to see the southern constellation and things like that. After some time, the precision will go backwards. You can't see that anymore. So imagine this kind of thing. You're on a ride in Disneyland. It's going this way and that way. So you can see that. So that is what Abhyankar has shown in this particular graph over here. There was a time when Agastya was not visible at all, more than 12,000 BCE and so on. Then it became visible in Kanyakumari in 10,000 BCE, in Chennai in 8,500 BCE, Hyderabad 7,200 BCE, Vindhyas in Delhi in 3,100 BC. Then eventually we are now at this point where it's visible all over India. It'll go through a disappearance cycle. So thousands of years from now, even from Kanyakumari, you won't be able to see because precision will work backwards against you. You can't see that anymore. So the interesting story by Abhyankar is, if Agastya was the first to cross the Vindhyas and see Canopus, he said the date for Agastya should be 5,200 BC. This is Professor Abhyankar's interpretation. But then I said, there are multiple stories that fit it. There is a story that Agastya was requested by the Devas to drink up the water in the ocean so that there's some demons living under the ocean. So the Devas could go and kill the demons. So Agastya does that. He drinks up the water. Then they go and kill the demons. Then the gods say, okay, your job is done now. Please give up the water once again. So eventually gives up the water. So this part of the story is very intriguing to me. Very, very intriguing because it seems to be a remembrance of the ice ages. The earth went through the last glacial maximum approximately 18,000 years ago. We had a maximum when most of the water was locked up in ice. When water is locked up in ice, the seashore, the sea line was far beyond where it is today. It is far beyond Kanyakumari, about 120 kilometers away from our present shoreline. You would have seen this thing. In fact, the estimate is sea level was 125 meters lower than where it is today. Approximately 400 feet. That is the sea level, thanks to the water locked up in ice. So this business of Agastya drinking of the waters, remembrance of the shorelines visible far beyond that, eventually ice is going to melt and the water level comes up again and Agastya has released this water once again. So we know that the melting, the late glacial maximum was 12,000 years ago. That is when most of this would have happened. And refilling the ocean corresponds to 7,000 years ago when waters had melted and we are more or less at the current position where we are. So there are multiple events that can fit the story, one by Abhyankar and one by these two. But it's intriguing to see the stories our ancestors have made to communicate some wisdom over here, some remembrance. In one case, a solar flare, and in this case, the ice ages. And these kind of memories are coming to us in these ways. Brahma and the cyclical nature of time. Our understanding of cosmology comes in over here. So we are told in Srimad Bhagavatam, in this particular place, that we have this Chaturyuga, Satya, Treta, Dwapara and Kali Yuga, in 4:3:2:1 ratio, with the Kali Yuga at 432,000 years, multiplied by 2 Dwapara, multiplied by 3 Treta, by 4. If you add up all these things, it comes to 4.32 million years. That is one Chaturyuga. You accumulate these, 71 of them makes what we call a Mahayuga. Then if you take 14 of them makes a Manvantara. And one of that makes a Kalpa. So this makes one Kalpa. One Kalpa becomes 4.32 billion years by this mathematics. It turns out to be one day of Brahma. Similarly, there is one night of Brahma of a similar period. There's also a Sandhya period where nothing is happening, a rest period. But eventually, we are told in Srimad Bhagavatam that there's a pralaya, a dissolution that happens in the night of Brahma. Then once again, Brahma brings up creation, and this is what we are told. We are also told that each Brahma lives for 100 such Brahma years, and we are in the 51st year of the current Brahma. I'd like you to just think about that for a minute. This is our ancestors who got an enormous conception of time. Now, if you take a look at other civilizations, we have things like God created the world in 6 days, rested on the 7th day. There are people who are trying to say that, adding up the genealogies in the Testament, Old Testament, they say 4004 BC is the creation date of the earth. It's a young earth and things of this nature. These are the kind of stories that other cultures seem to have had. But then in the Indian people, we have this enormous conception of time. They're saying it's all cyclicals, coming and going, coming and going. We are in the 51st year of the current Brahma, and this Brahma has got, so he lives 100 years and things of this nature, which means there's no beginning, no end. It's going on and on and on. This is what we are learning from here. Our current understanding of the way the universe has come about, this again, things can change. Astrophysics is saying there was a Big Bang about 13.8 billion years ago. Of course, there are people who say, no, the multiple Big Bangs. And yes, all those things are there. But eventually, this theory says we are today over here 13 billion years later when galaxies are formed, all these things are formed and so on. It's intriguing to see how the numbers over here come pretty close to our present day understanding of the age of the universe. By the way, this whole thing can be shattered and thrown because just 1 month back or 2 months back, the James Webb telescope, this is the one that sees in infrared, that spotted some galaxies where they shouldn't be there. It spotted some galaxies so far back in time that now some people say the age of the universe must be revised. It can't be 13.8 billion years, but maybe a lot older than that. So science keeps changing. We find new facts and things keep changing. Very interesting to see this. So this is a model in astrophysics where it's called the Big Bounce model, where there's an idea that a pre-existing universe can collapse due to gravity or some other forces that we don't understand, lead to singularity, and from the singularity can have a new universe coming up over here. So the recurrent creation and destruction cycle. This is a serious model studied in astrophysics. It's no longer theology or things that we have, right? Philosophical understandings of Brahma's day and night. And moving on, there is this professor called Roger Penrose. He came out with some startling ideas. He said that there is something called cosmic microwave background. I won't go into details of what it is, but it's something that scientists can discover all around us. There seems to be something called cosmic microwave background. This man, he said, I have measured 30 anomalies in this cosmic microwave background, and using some mathematics called conformal cyclical cosmology, he proposed that these are the black holes of the prior universe. The prior universe, like for example, if you have a big bang, galaxies form, expansion, go to maximum expansion, contraction, and all the black holes are the ones that radiate out the energy finally and all those kind of things. That leads to singularity. So the question that I ask my students is that, why is it that if the Big Bang happened, why is there asymmetry in the universe? Why don't we see the same number of stars everywhere? The distribution should be the same. It should be uniform. If there's nothing else impacting it, right? Everything should be uniform. The fact that some places we have more stars, some lesser, more galaxies, less galaxies, and so on, says there is some asymmetry because of some initial condition. What was that initial condition that caused the universe to evolve in that manner? This man is saying it is the black holes of the prior universe that is governing how this universe will evolve. I have likened that to Vasana. Vasana is a concept that we have, a concept we have in Vedanta that says the karmic actions that we have in this lifetime. Now, for example, we see some people are drawn towards something. For example, you have a child prodigy who becomes a musician. He asks, where did that come from? These parents are illiterate in music, but this kid is doing so well. And we say, Punarjanma, it came from that. So basically, karma is like what we have, like a rut on our Atman. It's like a cart that is going on the village road, right? The mud road is a rut over there, the cart going on and on over there. If the cart wheel tries to come out of that rut, it's pulled back into that rut, right? So it keeps going on the rut. So vasana is like that. Our habits and everything is like that. So we are governed by perhaps what we did in our prior janma, and those imprints we have on our Atman drive us into certain ways of doing. Bhagavan Krishna promised that when Arjuna, he says, Krishna, I'm a weak guy. You're asking me to do all these things, but I can't do it. And I'm going to fail at both things. I can't enjoy this lifetime because of everything you said. Neither can I achieve this glory as a warrior that you're saying. I'm a lost guy. So Krishna consoles him. He says, don't worry. Anybody who works for the spiritual fulfillment, in your next birth, you'll be closer to a spiritual goal. You might be born into a family that is drawing you towards spiritual practice, or the other way around, further away from a spiritual goal. So the idea of this karmic vasana is imprinted in several places, Bhagavad Gita and many other places, we see that. So I try to see what he's saying in the terms of vasana. The universe itself is alive. The universe itself is karma, based on the black holes and things of this nature, is driving the evolution of the universe. Very interesting to see this. This is in 2018. He got the Nobel Prize in 2022, I think, for his work on black holes and things like that. So, there's one more story I'd like to tell you. This is the story of the missing seventh sister. Okay? So, this illustrates how Indian astronomy influenced the Greeks. Now, the Greeks have a story of the Pleiades. The Pleiades are the virginal companions of the goddess called Artemis. So one day these girls were frolicking in the lake, and a serial predator, Orion, the hunter, he spies them and is enamored by these girls, and he starts chasing them. Artemis is furious. She doesn't want this fellow to follow her girls. She goes to the god called Zeus and says, protect my girls. Zeus doesn't care. So she takes things into her own hands, and she has Artemis killed by a scorpion. Now this is this is an astronomical metaphor. I'll talk about that maybe a little later. Eventually Zeus immortalizes Orion. This is the Orion constellation, and Pleiades. This Pleiades over there. He makes them both as stars in the sky. So this is what the Greek story says. And in the Greek tradition, we say there are 7 sisters, but we can only see 6 of them. What happened to the 7th one? The tradition says Merope was a 7th sister. She had an affair with a mortal man. In shame, she hid her face. Because she hid her face, we don't see her. That's why we got 6 sisters. Would you believe we have a similar story in India? The story comes from Markandeya Purana. In Markandeya Purana, we are told that at the Homa of the Saptarishis, Agni was officiating priest. So he looks around the Homa, and he sees the wives of the Saptarishis, beautiful women. And he's so attracted to them, then he feels ashamed about himself. I'm attracted to a married woman, he's not happy about it. He goes off and does tapasya. When he's doing tapasya, he's neglected his own companion Swaha. And Swaha has got unrequited love, right, for Agni. But she knows this fellow's weakness. So she assumes the form of each of the Saptarishis' wives and she seduces Agni. But she could not take the form of the seventh sister, that is Arundhati. Arundhati's chastity is legendary, so she could not take her form. So the six-headed Kartikeya or Skanda was born because of this activity over here. And it caused great disturbance. This is what Markandeya Purana tells us. And the forest dwellers had seen all the dilly-dallying by Agni, and so, or what they thought it was, and they go to the Devas and complain. Now the Saptarishis' wives are all innocent women. They've not done anything. But in shame, they leave their husbands and they become the Kritika Nakshatra. So this is the story over here. What about the seventh sister, Arundhati? She remained with her husband in the Great Bear constellation Saptarishi Mandala. With Vashishta, she remains over there. So even today you see the binary pair. So this is the Indian story and the Greek story. You see similarities in both places. There's an element of illicit romance and other such things. Minor transformations are there. We see that all the time, Purana stories and Greek stories, a small transformation is there, but essentially the story is the same. And here's one such example that talks about that. We have come to the end. So what I've shown is wisdom was encoded in the form of stories. Because stories are so entertaining, we are able to remember them over a large passage of time. And I told you the story of Dhruva, the pole star, story of Surya, the solar flare, story of Yayati, who's the Andromeda galaxy, story of Mercury's birth and how it parallels modern theories, story of Chandra's birth and parallel modern theory, Kakudmi and Revati on dilated time, Atri's eclipse and prediction of eclipse, Aditi's bone on precision of equinox, love story of Chandra, sidereal, synodic month, occultation, Agastya on ice ages, sorry for spelling mistakes, Brahma's time cycle and cosmology, the missing seventh sister, our Greek copies of Purana stories. What is the backstory of all of these things implicitly is there is great antiquity. In the astronomy that I pointed out to you, 6000 BC, 7000 BC, great antiquity is hinted. This is completely against what we learn in our textbooks, NCERT textbooks, with this notion of so-called Aryan invasion, migration, 1500 BC. So the linguists who have proposed this theory, they say that these Aryans came to India and they composed the Rig Veda in India. Why? Because Rig Veda has got the geography of India. It's got the rivers of India. It's got the Himalayan mountains and other things. Therefore, these Vedas are composed in India. And if we believe Max Muller, he said Chandas period, Mantra period, Brahmana period, Sutra period, 1200 BC to 200 BC when these works were done. However, we have a problem. We have a problem because our astronomy is showing great antiquity. This is what I have been doing for many years. So you can see my talks on YouTube, search for my name. And I've tried to address these kind of contradictions. And I show that if you take multiple disciplines and look for the evidence, they all point to the antiquity of the Indian civilization. We are an ancient people. We are not a newly arrived civilization. Ancient people. And we got great accumulations of stories, science, and other such things in our civilization. Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
ಎಲ್ಲವೂ ಕಥೆಗಳ ರೂಪದಲ್ಲಿ ಇದ್ದಿದ್ದರಿಂದ ಯಾವುದೋ ಪ್ರಶ್ನೆಗಳಿಲ್ಲ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡು ಮುಂದುವರಿತೀನಿ. ಲೈಟ್ ಭಾರತೀಯರಿಗೆ ಚಿಕ್ಕ ವಯಸ್ಸಿಂದನೂ ಕತೆ ಕೇಳೋದು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರಿಯವಾದ ಕೆಲಸ. ಆ ಏನು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಪ್ರಿಯವಾದ್ದು ನಮ್ಮ ತಲೆ ಬೆಳಗಾದ್ರೂ ಕಂಟಿನ್ಯೂ ಆಗತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಇವತ್ತು ಅರ್ಥ ಆಯಿತು. ಮತ್ತು ಇವತ್ತಿನ ದಿನ ಸುಮಾರು 12 ಕಥೆಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಂ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮನ್ನು ಅತ್ಯಂತ ರಮ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಕಥೆಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ ಒಂದು ರಂಜಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಎರಡನೇದು ನಮ್ಮ ಭಾರತೀಯ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಪರಂಪರೆಯಲ್ಲಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ವಿಶೇಷಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ಮತ್ತು ಅದಕ್ಕಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಇದು ವೈಜ್ಞಾನಿಕ ಆಧಾರಗಳನ್ನು ಕೂಡ ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಇಟ್ಟಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಭಾರತೀಯರು ಯಾವುದೇ ವಿಷಯವನ್ನು ತಿಳಿಸ್ಲಿಕ್ಕೆ ಕಥೆಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ತಿಳಿಸಿದರೆ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಉಪಯೋಗ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ಕಥೆಗಳ ಮೂಲಕ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಯಾರೆ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಭಾವಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಎರಡು ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು ಅಂದರೆ ನಾನು ಆಗಲೇ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಿದ್ದೆ. ನಮ್ಮಲ್ಲಿ ಪುರಂದರದಾಸರು ಹೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ಕೆರೆಯ ನೀರನ್ನು ಕೆರೆಗೆ ಚೆಲ್ಲಿ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ. ಅಂದರೆ ಯಾವ ಸಮಾಜದಿಂದ ನನಗೆ ಈ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಬಂದಿದೆ, ಆ ಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಂಪತ್ತನ್ನು ಮತ್ತೆ ಆ ಸಮಾಜಕ್ಕೆ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು, ಆ ಸಮಾಜದ ಮೇಲೆ ಸಮಾಜದ ಜೊತೆ ಹಂಚ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋ ಒಂದು ಉದ್ದೇಶದಿಂದ ಅವರು ಸುಮಾರು ಕಳೆದ 12 ವರ್ಷದಿಂದ ಪ್ರತಿ ವರ್ಷ ಭಾರತಕ್ಕೆ ಬಂದು ಭಾರತದ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ನಗರಗಳಲ್ಲಿ ಈ ರೀತಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಜ್ಞಾನವನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲರ ಜೊತೆ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊತಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಇದು ಒಂಥರ ನಾವು ಜ್ಞಾನಯಜ್ಞ ಅಂತಲೇ ಹೇಳಬೇಕಾಗ್ತದೆ. ಹೀಗೆ ತಮಗೆ ಏನು ಜ್ಞಾನ ಸಿಕ್ಕಿದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ಮತ್ತೆ ಸಮಾಜಕ್ಕೆ ಕೊಡೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ ಹಂಚ್ಕೊಳ್ಳೋದ್ರ ಮೂಲಕ ಈ ಸಮಾಜದ ಋಣವನ್ನು ಅವರು ತೀರಿಸ್ತಿದ್ದಾರೆ ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ನಾನು ಭಾವಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ಅಭಿನಂದಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ನಾನು ಕಳೆದ 3 ದಿನದಿಂದ ಅವ್ರ ಜೊತೆನೇ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಅವ್ರದ್ದು 6ನೇ ಭಾಷಣ ಈಗಿದು. ಇವತ್ತಿಗೆ ಈ ಪ್ರವಾಸದ ಅವರದ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳು ಮುಗಿಯುತ್ತೆ. ಮತ್ತು 4ನೇ ತಾರೀಕು ಅವ್ರು ಮತ್ತೆ ಅಮೇರಿಕಾಗೆ ಹೋಗಿ ಕೆಲಸ ಶುರು ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತು ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಕಲ್ಚರಿಂದ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ನೀವು ಬರಬೇಕು, ಈ ರೀತಿ ಒಂದು ವಿಶೇಷವಾದ ವಿಷಯದ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ಮಾತಾಡಬೇಕು, ನೀವು ಬೇರೆ ಕಡೆಯೆಲ್ಲ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸ ಮಾಡ್ತೀರಾ, ಇಲ್ಲಿ ಕಥೆ ಹೇಳಬೇಕು ಅಂತ ಹೇಳಿದಾಗ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಸಂತೋಷದಿಂದ ಒಪ್ಕೊಂಡು ಅದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ತಯಾರಿ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊಂಡ್ಬಂದು ಇವತ್ತು ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಂದೆ ಪ್ರಸ್ತುತಪಡಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೆ ತಮ್ಮೆಲ್ಲರ ಪರವಾಗಿ, ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಇಂಡಿಯನ್ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟ್ ಆಫ್ ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅನಂತ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಸಮರ್ಪಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಅವರನ್ನು ಗೌರವಿಸಬೇಕು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಸ್ಥೆ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಸತ್ಯವತಿಯವ್ರನ್ನ ಮತ್ತು ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ಯೂನಿವರ್ಸಿಟಿಯ ವೈಸ್ ಚಾನ್ಸಲರ್ ಆದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ಅಹಲ್ಯ ಮೇಡಮ್ ಅವ್ರನ್ನ ವೇದಿಕೆಗೆ ಕರೀತೆ.
request you to please sit down and take this honor. Bani,
ಬನ್ನಿ. ಮೇಡಮ್ ಬನ್ನಿ.
Thank you.
ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾದ್ರೆ ನಮಗೂ ಸ್ವಲ್ಪ ಯೋಚನೆ ಇತ್ತು. ಏಕೆಂದರೆ ಸಾಕಷ್ಟು ಮಳೆಗಾಲ ಅಲ್ಲದೇ ಇದ್ದರೂ ಹೆಚ್ಚು ಮಳೆ ಬರ್ತಾ ಇದೆ. ಮತ್ತು ಎರಡನೇದಾಗಿ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಡೇ, ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಸಭಿಕರು ಬರೋದು ಕಷ್ಟ ಆಗತ್ತೆ ಅಂತ ಅಂದ್ಕೊಂಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಇವತ್ತು 5 ಗಂಟೆಗೆ ಒಬ್ಬರು ಬಂದಿದ್ದರು. ಅವ್ರು ಹೇಳಿದರು ಆಮೇಲೆ ಮಳೆ ಬರ್ಬೋದು ಅಂತ ಬೇಗನೆ ಬಂದುಬಿಟ್ಟಿದ್ದೀನಿ ಅಂತ. ಅಂದರೆ ರಾಜ್ ವೇದಮ್ ಅವರ ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಗಳು ಬೆಂಗಳೂರಲ್ಲಿ ಎಷ್ಟು ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಮೂಡಿಸಿವೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅದರಿಂದ ಅರ್ಥ ಆಗುತ್ತೆ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ವರ್ಕಿಂಗ್ ಡೇ ಆದರೂ ಕೂಡ ಸಾಯಂಕಾಲ ಮಳೆ ಬರೋ ಸನ್ನಿವೇಶ ಇದ್ದರೂ ತಾವೆಲ್ಲ ಬಂದಿದ್ದೀರಾ. ಹಾಗಾಗಿ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಅನಂತ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಅನೇಕ ಹಿರಿಯರು ಕೂಡ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಗವಹಿಸಿದ್ದಾರೆ. ಮಿಥಿಕ್ ಸೊಸೈಟಿ ಅಧ್ಯಕ್ಷರು ಮತ್ತು ಗೋಖಲೆ ಇನ್ಸ್ಟಿಟ್ಯೂಟಿನ ಗೌರವ ಕಾರ್ಯದರ್ಶಿಗಳು ಆದಂಥ ಶ್ರೀಯುತ ವಿ ನಾಗರಾಜ್ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ಮಧ್ಯೆ ಇದ್ದಾರೆ. ಅವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ಸಂಸ್ಕೃತ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯ ಮತ್ತು ವರ್ಲ್ಡ್ ಕಲ್ಚರ್ ಪರವಾಗಿ ಅನಂತ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನ ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತೇನೆ. ಈ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮನ ಅನೇಕರು ಮನೆಗಳಲ್ಲೂ ಕೂಡ ಕೂತ್ಕೊಂಡು ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇರಬೇಕು. ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳು. ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮನ ಯಶಸ್ವಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ದಕ್ಕೋಸ್ಕರ ಒಂದು ಉಪನ್ಯಾಸಕರಾದಂಥ ಡಾಕ್ಟರ್ ರಾಜ ವೇದಂ ಅವ್ರಿಗೂ ಮತ್ತು ಶ್ರೋತೃಗಳಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ಮತ್ತೊಮ್ಮೆ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನು ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತಾ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮುಕ್ತ ಆಗಿದೆ. ವಿಶೇಷ ಇದು ಅಂದರೆ ನವಂಬರ್ 1 ನಮಗೆಲ್ಲ ತಿಳಿದಿರುವಂತೆ ಪರಂಪರೆಯಿಂದ ನಮ್ಮ ಸಂಪ್ರದಾಯ ಆಗಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳ ಮಾರಾಟ ಇದೆ. ದಯವಿಟ್ಟು ನವಂಬರ್ 1ನೇ ತಾರೀಕು ಬಂದು ಪುಸ್ತಕಗಳನ್ನು ನಮ್ಗೆ ಯಾವ ಪುಸ್ತಕದಲ್ಲಿ ಆಸಕ್ತಿ ಇರ್ತದೆ ಅದನ್ನು ತೊಗೊಂಡು ಹೋಗ್ಬೋದು. ಹಾಗೆಯೇ ಈ ಸಂಗತಿಯನ್ನು ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ತಿಳಿಸ್ಬೇಕು ಅಂಥೇಳಿ ತಮ್ಮ ಮೂಲಕ ನಾನು ಕಳಕಳಿಯಾಗಿ ಪ್ರಾರ್ಥನೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೊತೇನೆ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.